Have you ever heard of those places where the light seems to flicker and the darkness takes on a life of its own? Where silence is not just the absence of sound, but the harbinger of something terrible lurking in the shadows? Today, I'm going to take you inside one of the most common, yet also one of the scariest places there is. A restaurant where the bloody past merges with the present, and where a simple order can become the beginning of your worst nightmare. Imagine being alone in the middle of the night when everything seems too calm, when normality disappears like a fog and the unknown begins to whisper your name. Would you be willing to listen to what this story has to say? If the answer is yes, get ready, because from this moment on, every sound, every shadow will seem to carry a threat. If you have the courage, write here in the comments that you would face this fear with me. But be careful, some stories don't just want to be heard, they want to be lived. Story 1. I never should have taken the midnight shift at that abandoned Burger King off Interstate 80 in Iowa. The manager promised me it would be easy. Just clean up and close up, he said. But when the last customer left and I was left alone in that dining room lit only by emergency lights, I sensed something wrong from the first minute. The air smelled of burning oil and something else, something sweet and rotten like meat that had been forgotten in the back of the freezer. I was sweeping the floor near the tables when I heard the first noise, a metallic click coming from the kitchen, as if someone had opened the freezer. Must be the refrigeration system, I thought, trying to convince myself. But then came the sound of scraping, chairs being moved in the main room. I ran to look, and my blood ran cold. Every chair, every table, was being stacked in the center of the room as if invisible hands were arranging them in some ritualistic pattern. The pile formed a rough altar of sorts, and on top, on top was a Burger King uniform. My uniform. The name tag, Dylan, was clearly visible, even in the dim light. But what made me flinch was what covered the fabric, dark wet stains that could only be fresh blood. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely reach for my cell phone to call the manager. That's when I heard it. At first it was a whisper, so low I thought I'd imagined it. Then it grew louder, multiplying into dozens of voices that echoed off the empty walls. You're already late. You're already late. The temperature plummeted, and I felt my breath forming clouds of steam in the frigid air. I ran to the back door, but it was locked, and I knew I'd left it unlocked. The ordering system turned on by itself, and the robotic voice announced, "Order 666, ready for pickup." That's when I realized the voices were coming from the speakers. I screamed for help, banging on doors and windows until I finally managed to break down the emergency exit. I'd never run so fast in my life. The next day when I returned with the manager, the restaurant was spotless. The chairs were in place, no trace of the altar or the bloody uniform. But the freezer was full of a black, sticky substance that no one could identify. And on the time clock, my name was still listed as present from the night before. At 3:17 a.m., the exact time an employee had hanged himself in the freezer 5 years earlier. Now, every time I walk past a Burger King at night, I swear I see a silhouette behind the counter, wearing a stained uniform, patiently waiting for the next employee to agree to work the late shift. Story 2. I used to work at the oldest Burger King in Savannah, Georgia, the 2-story building that always gave new employees the creeps. The aging architecture, peeling walls, and constant creaking of the stairs created a heavy atmosphere, as if the place held dark memories that should never be disturbed. During my first week, the manager warned me in a serious, almost somber tone, "Never take orders for the upper floor." I laughed, thinking it was some inside joke to scare the newbies, a silly story that everyone repeated. Little did I know that this warning would be the fine line between reason and nightmare. It was a cold October night, the kind of night when the wind howled through the deserted streets and the full moon cast long, unsettling shadows over the city. The clock read nearly 3 a.m. when the intercom rang, an unexpected shrill sound that cut through the silence of the kitchen where I sat alone, preparing the last of the drive-through orders. The voice coming from it was strangely distorted, like it was being broadcast over an old-fashioned radio, full of static and echo. 2 Whoppers with cheese, 1 large Coke, upstairs. For a moment, I thought someone was playing a prank on me. I looked around. The restaurant was completely empty. I was the only one there. My heart pounding. I picked up the tray and started up the service stairs, each step creaking differently, as if the building itself was warning me to turn back, not to go forward. The air grew heavier and colder as I climbed, and the silence around me was deafening. When I reached the top, the door was ajar, something that never happened, since it was always locked. As I pushed it open, a sickening, sour smell of spoiled meat hit me like a punch in the stomach, making me almost vomit. The upper floor was a distorted and disturbing version of the restaurant below. The tables and chairs were arranged exactly as they had been on the ground floor, but all were covered in a thick layer of dust that looked as if it had been untouched for years. In the center of the room, a single table was clean, almost as if it had been recently prepared. On it were 2 rotting hamburgers and an empty soda cup, which was slowly dripping, forming small black puddles on the top. Above the table, an old wall clock stood still, marked at 3:17 in the morning, the exact time that was part of a story I still didn't know. That's when I heard it. A wet, drawn-out sigh from behind me, cold enough to chill my spine. I turned so fast I knocked over the tray, the soda spilling across the dusty floor in patterns that looked like fingers running toward me. My survival instincts kicked in, and I ran for the stairs, desperate to get out of this place. But when I got to the top of the stairs, I realized the door to the floor below was locked. I knocked frantically, yelled for help, until finally I heard the sound of the lock slowly opening. As I descended, I looked back one last time and saw something that haunts me to this day. A tall, thin figure wearing an old Burger King uniform stood in front of the table with the rotting burgers. His long fingers traced slow circles in the dust as the door slowly closed, as if sealing not only that floor, but also the fate of the spirit trapped there. The next day, the manager found me shaking and weak in the stockroom. When I told him what had happened, he turned pale, his eyes fixed on the floor. "The upstairs has been closed since 1993, he finally said, his voice low. After an employee fell down those stairs at exactly 3:17 in the morning. He refused to say more, but I could see his eyes darting to the old time clock on the wall, where the name James was still marked in red on the sheet from the day of the accident. Ever since that night, every time the intercom rings after midnight, I simply unplug it. Still, when I'm alone in the kitchen, I sometimes hear the distorted voice whisper through the speakers, "The order from upstairs is waiting." A dark, icy warning that reminds me that the past is never truly dead, and that some stories haunt us forever. Story 3. It was my 3rd week working the overnight shift at the Burger King on Route 66 in Flagstaff, Arizona. The place had a reputation among truckers and locals for being haunted, full of stories and legends that circulated along the roads and in nearby bars. I had always heard these stories with a skeptical smile, thinking they were just nonsense to scare newbies, until that full moon night in November that changed everything for me. That shift started like any other. There was almost no movement, and the only light that came in was from the fluorescent lights, which kept flickering every now and then, casting dancing shadows on the worn walls of the restaurant. The clock on the wall read 3:03 a.m. when the bell at the front door suddenly rang, breaking the heavy silence of the early morning. I found it strange since the drive-thru was still open, and the few people who normally went through there preferred to order there. The table area had already been closed for cleaning, and I was alone in the dining room, leaning over the counter. I looked up, curious, and saw a man standing in front of table 13. There was always something odd about that table. The last one, to be occupied. The one that caused the most problems in the system and where employees avoided going alone. He was too tall, too thin, almost unnatural. The black suit he wore didn't reflect the light. It seemed to suck up all the light around him. His movements were stiff, as if he were trying too hard to appear human, but failing in small ways. When he sat down, I heard the wet sound of something pressing against the plastic seat, as if it were heavy and slimy. "Good evening," he said, his voice low and husky, making my teeth ache in a strange way, as if his voice had a physical texture. "I'd like a Whopper. No bun, no meat, No, nothing. His lips curled into a sickly, crooked smile, revealing teeth that were too sharp and too white to be human. I tried to type the order into the system, but the computer froze, the screen froze, and only displayed the error code 666. My fingers trembled, but I decided to improvise. I grabbed a clean plate and placed on the tray exactly what he had ordered. Nothing. Pure emptiness. An almost surreal image on the white tray. As I handed it over, his icy hands touched mine for a moment. His skin was cold and slippery, like wet leather, something strange and inhuman. "Finally," he whispered, "someone who understands the true taste of emptiness." His eyes, God, his eyes were like black holes, bottomless, sucking out any hope or light around them. Blinking was the only mistake I made. When I opened my eyes, he was gone without a trace, as if he had evaporated into the cold early morning air. Only table 13 remained, covered in a black viscous substance that was slowly dripping down the edges onto the floor. I tried to wipe it away, but the liquid seemed alive, writhing beneath the cloth like some crawling creature. The next day, the manager found the table completely destroyed. The chairs were twisted, as if something huge had writhed there during the night, leaving a trail of strangeness and fear that no one wanted to explain. Ever since then, every time the clock strikes 3:03 a.m., I refuse to look at table 13. But I can't deny that sometimes, in the corner of my eye, I see a silhouette sitting there, patiently waiting for his special order. And worse, some nights, when I walk past the empty kitchen, I hear the sound of chewing coming from the darkness, a sound that shouldn't be there, but that insists on reminding me that he's still there, hungry for the emptiness that only I could understand. If you had the courage to listen to this story until the end, now I want to know. Would you have the audacity to go up those stairs and make a request to the floor above? If one day you heard that intercom ring after midnight, would you answer it? Or would you run away, like many who never returned? Leave your answer in the comments below. And don't forget, pay attention to the shadows and sounds that you may not be able to explain. Because in the end, the real question is, who is really waiting for your request? Subscribe to the channel for more dark and haunting stories like this one. And brace yourself, because the next tale might be the scariest yet. Until next time, if you dare.